Everyone at Eli Carter's funeral looked at Ida Nichols the same way people look at a woman standing on the edge of a cliff. Pity, curiosity, relief that it wasn't them. While soft violin music echoed through the marble chapel, Sabrina Vale stood beside Margaret Carter, wearing Ida's missing diamond bracelet like a victory trophy. Nobody said a word about it. Nobody dared to. "They'll take care of Sabrina now," someone whispered behind Ida. "Poor Ida probably doesn't even know what Eli left her." Ida lowered her eyes to the black envelope resting quietly in her lap. They were wrong, because 3 nights before the funeral, Ida had already read the second will. And by the end of today, the Carter family was going to realize they had buried the wrong person. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who broke your heart, stay with this story until the end, because some women don't rise from love. They rise from betrayal. Before Eli Carter became the man people admired on magazine covers, he was just a charming law student with tired eyes and cheap cologne who used to kiss Ida Nichols in grocery store parking lots. Back then, he looked at her like she was the answer to every difficult thing in his life. And Ida believed him. She met him at 27 during a fundraising event in downtown Chicago. Eli was brilliant, ambitious, magnetic in the dangerous way certain men are. He spoke like he already knew he would become powerful someday. Ida loved that confidence. She just didn't realize confidence and entitlement often grew from the same root. "You make me feel calm," Eli told her once during their first winter together. At the time, she thought it was romantic. Years later, she would understand what he really meant was, "You make my life easier." The Carter family never truly welcomed her. They tolerated her. Margaret Carter especially made sure Ida understood the difference. The first time Ida attended dinner at the Carter estate in Connecticut, Margaret scanned her from head to toe before smiling politely. "So you work in marketing?" Margaret asked. Ida nodded. "I do." "How nice," Margaret replied, in the same tone people used when complimenting a child's drawing. Eli squeezed Ida's hand under the table that night, as if silently apologizing for his mother's coldness. Ida appreciated it then. Now she realized he had spent their entire marriage apologizing quietly instead of defending her loudly. That was the beginning of everything. Still, Ida tried. God, she tried. When Eli launched his corporate consulting firm, she stayed up until 2 a.m. designing presentation decks while holding ice packs against her swollen wrists. When his father Walter became ill, Ida drove him to appointments, organized medications, sat beside his hospital bed for hours, while the rest of the family attended charity galas and investor dinners. Walter used to smile softly when she adjusted his blankets. "You're the only real thing in this family," he once whispered. Ida laughed awkwardly at the time. She didn't know he meant it literally. As Eli's company grew, Ida quietly disappeared behind his success. She quit her own career after he convinced her it was temporary. Just until things stabilize, he promised. They never stabilized. Instead, Ida became the invisible architect of his life. She planned dinners, managed schedules, hosted clients, smoothed over scandals, remembered birthdays, handled emergencies, protected his image. And somehow, despite carrying half his world on her back, she was always treated like she contributed nothing, especially by Gavin Carter. Eli's younger brother had inherited the family arrogance without inheriting any discipline. At parties, Gavin called Ida Saint Ida because she was always cleaning up everyone else's messes. She'd probably apologize if somebody robbed her, he joked once while drunk. Everyone laughed, even Eli. That memory still burned. The humiliation wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it came in tiny cuts. Margaret correcting Ida's pronunciation at dinner. Eli answering emails while Ida spoke. Family photos where Sabrina Vale somehow always stood closer to Eli than Ida did. At first, Ida ignored it. Then she explained it away. Then she blamed herself for noticing. That was how emotional manipulation worked. It trained you to distrust your own instincts. "You're too sensitive," Eli often said whenever she brought up his distance. And eventually, Ida started believing him. The changes in Eli happened slowly enough to feel almost invisible. He stopped kissing her goodbye in the mornings, stopped asking about her day, stopped touching her casually. Their conversations became transactional. Bills, events, appearances, obligations. Sometimes Ida would wake in the middle of the night and find him sitting in the glow of his phone screen, smiling faintly at messages he immediately hid when she moved. Work stuff, he'd mutter. Always work. One Friday evening, Ida spent 6 hours preparing a dinner party for Eli's investors. The dining table looked flawless under candlelight. White orchids, crystal glasses, handwritten place cards. Sabrina Vale arrived wearing silver silk and confidence. She kissed Eli on the cheek. Too comfortably. Ida noticed it instantly. Margaret adored Sabrina openly. "Oh, Sabrina, thank God you're here," Margaret said dramatically. "You always know how to brighten a room." Meanwhile, Ida stood there holding a tray like hired staff. Throughout dinner, Sabrina monopolized Eli's attention effortlessly. Every time she laughed, he looked alive again. Ida couldn't remember the last time he looked at her that way. At one point, Sabrina touched Eli's wrist during conversation. A tiny gesture, small enough to deny, intimate enough to wound. Ida felt something cold settle deep inside her stomach. Later that night, after guests left, she stood at the kitchen counter silently washing dishes while Eli loosened his tie nearby. "You and Sabrina seem close," Ida said carefully. Eli sighed immediately. "Not guilty, annoyed. Seriously, I'm just asking. She works with major donors, Ida. Networking matters, I know, but you always do this." Her hands froze underwater. "Do what create problems where there aren't any." That sentence stayed with her for months. Because after enough repetition, manipulation starts sounding like truth. So Ida tried harder. She bought lingerie he barely noticed. Planned anniversary weekends he canceled. Cooked meals he ignored while answering texts. Loved a man who treated her affection like background noise. And the cruelest part, she still defended him. To Nina. To herself. To the mirror. He's stressed. He's grieving his dad. He's under pressure. Excuses became the language of her survival. Then came the night everything cracked. Eli returned home after midnight smelling like expensive whiskey and unfamiliar perfume. He tossed his jacket over the bedroom chair before disappearing into the shower. Ida almost ignored it. Almost. But something inside her, something exhausted and starving for truth, finally pushed her forward. Her fingers trembled as she checked the inside pocket. And there it was. A receipt. Black embossed lettering across thick ivory paper. The Aurelia Grand Hotel Suite. 917, 2 guests. Champagne service. 3 nights. Ida stared at the signature at the bottom. S. Vale. For a moment the world became completely silent. Not dramatic silence, not cinematic silence. The kind of silence that happens when your heart finally stops arguing with reality. Steam drifted from the bathroom down the hallway, while Ida stood frozen beside the bed. The shower kept running. Eli was humming softly to himself. Comfortable, careless, certain she would never leave. Ida slowly folded the receipt in half. Then again, and again, until the sharp paper edges dug into her palm hard enough to hurt. For the first time in years, she stopped asking herself whether she was imagining things, because the truth was finally sitting in her hand, and it had Sabrina Vale's name written all over it. Ida Nichols did not sleep that night. She lay beside Eli in the dark, while his breathing remained slow and steady, one arm resting loosely across the expensive sheets like a man untouched by guilt. The hotel receipt sat hidden inside her nightstand drawer. Burning. Every few minutes, Ida stared at the ceiling and told herself there had to be another explanation. Business meeting, shared reservation, corporate event, anything. But deep down, her body already knew the truth before her mind was willing to admit it. That was the terrible thing about betrayal. Your intuition usually arrives long before your courage does. At 6 a.m, Eli kissed her forehead casually before leaving for work. "Don't wait up tonight," he said while adjusting his cufflinks. Dinner with investors. Ida almost laughed. Instead, she smiled softly. Of course. The second the front door closed, the smile disappeared from her face completely. For nearly 10 minutes, she stood motionless in the silent kitchen. Then something inside her hardened. Not healed, not empowered, just exhausted enough to stop lying to herself. By noon, Ida sat in her car across from the Aurelia Grand Hotel downtown. Rain streaked across the windshield in silver lines while the massive glass building reflected the gray Chicago sky. She felt ridiculous, pathetic, like every suspicious wife she used to judge quietly in movies. But humiliation had a strange way of killing pride. At 6:42 p.m., Eli's black Mercedes pulled into the valet entrance. Ida stopped breathing. He stepped out wearing the charcoal coat she bought him for Christmas 2 years earlier. The one he claimed was too expensive. Apparently not too expensive for an affair. 5 minutes later, another car arrived. Sabrina Vale emerged in sleek cream-colored heels and a camel coat wrapped tightly around her waist. Elegant, effortless, beautiful in the polished way wealthy women perfected over time. The valet greeted her by name. That detail hurt more than Ida expected, because it meant this wasn't new. Sabrina walked toward the entrance. Then Eli appeared beside her and kissed her. Not quickly, not guiltily, comfortably, like a man kissing someone he no longer bothered hiding. Ida's fingers tightened around the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. For a moment, the entire world narrowed into fragments. Rain against glass, headlights reflecting off wet pavement, Sabrina smiling against Eli's mouth. And suddenly Ida understood why she had felt lonely for so long inside her own marriage. Because Eli had emotionally left her years ago. She just hadn't stopped loving him yet. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to keep watching. Eli wrapped his hand against Sabrina's lower back possessively. The same gesture he used to do to Ida. The same gesture he stopped doing months ago. Sabrina laughed at something he whispered. Then they disappeared inside the hotel together. Ida sat frozen. A strange numbness spread through her chest. Oddly enough, the pain wasn't explosive. It was quiet, like mourning someone before they officially died. After 20 minutes, Ida finally stepped out of the car. The lobby smelled like lilies and expensive perfume. Warm golden chandeliers glowed overhead, while couples crossed marble floors laughing softly. Nobody noticed the devastated woman standing near the entrance pretending she wasn't falling apart. At the front desk, Ida forced herself to smile politely. "Hi," she said. "My husband's staying here. Eli Carter." The receptionist typed briefly. "Yes, ma'am." The confirmation sliced through her like glass. "Could you connect me to his room? One moment." Ida watched the receptionist press buttons calmly. Then came the answer. Suite 917, the exact room from the receipt. Reality settled fully into place then. No denial left. No confusion. Just truth. Ida thanked the receptionist somehow and walked away before her knees gave out completely. Outside, cold rain soaked through her coat instantly. She barely noticed. All she could hear was Eli's voice from months earlier. "You always create problems where there aren't any." The cruelty of that sentence finally became clear. He hadn't been defending innocence. He had been protecting deception. Ida drove home in silence. But something changed during that drive. The heartbreak remained. The humiliation remained. But beneath both emotions, another feeling slowly began growing. Awareness. For years, Ida blamed herself every time Eli pulled away emotionally. She thought maybe she wasn't exciting enough anymore, pretty enough, interesting enough, young enough. Women in pain often searched for flaws inside themselves before daring to accuse the people hurting them. But now she saw it clearly. Eli did not betray her because she lacked value. He betrayed her because he lacked character. That realization terrified her almost as much as the affair itself. Around midnight, Eli finally came home. Ida sat alone in the dark living room with a glass of untouched wine beside her. Eli looked surprised to find her awake. "You scared me," he muttered while loosening his tie. She studied him carefully. The familiar face, the familiar voice, the man she once trusted more than herself. How strange it was to suddenly realize you no longer recognized someone you had loved for years. "How was dinner?" Ida asked quietly. Eli shrugged. "Long. Lie." The word practically echoed between them. He walked toward the kitchen, grabbing bottled water from the fridge. "You okay?" he asked casually. Ida almost admired how easily he performed normalcy. "How long have you known Sabrina?" she asked. Eli paused briefly, too briefly for innocence. "What? She seems important to you." A shadow crossed his expression before disappearing instantly. "She works with donors, Ida." "Why are you acting weird lately?" There it was again. That subtle redirection. The manipulation wrapped in calmness. Suddenly, Ida saw every conversation differently, every dismissal, every time he made her question her instincts. She felt nauseous. "I'm not acting weird," she replied softly. Eli sighed dramatically. "I really don't have energy for this tonight. For this," as though her pain was an inconvenience. He started walking upstairs, then stopped halfway. "Oh," he added casually, "Sabrina's joining us for the Whitmore Foundation Gala next month. Margaret invited her." Of course she did. Ida stared at the staircase after he disappeared. Something cold settled inside her chest completely. Not rage yet, not revenge, just clarity. And clarity could become dangerous very quickly. The next morning, Ida began searching. At first, she only wanted proof. Something undeniable. But the deeper she looked, the uglier things became. Private transfers, unfamiliar accounts, charity funds routed strangely, late-night meetings, burner phone records, and Sabrina's name appeared everywhere, not just as a mistress, as a partner. Ida sat at Eli's office desk while sunlight crept slowly across the room. Her pulse pounded harder with every document she uncovered. This wasn't simply an affair. It was strategy, planning, preparation. Then she found the email. A forwarded message between Eli and Sabrina. Short, cold, brutal. "After the funeral, Ida won't have anything left. We just need her cooperative until then." Ida stopped breathing. Funeral. The word echoed violently inside her head. Funeral? Whose funeral? Her eyes moved upward toward the earlier medical attachment in the email chain. And for the first time, Ida noticed the oncology clinic logo at the top of the screen. A chill spread through her entire body. Because suddenly the affair was no longer the scariest secret in her marriage. Something much darker was hiding underneath it. And whatever Eli Carter was planning, it involved death. For 3 days, Ida Nichols carried the knowledge inside her like broken glass beneath her skin. Eli was having an affair. And somehow, impossibly, death was tangled up in it. She wanted to confront him, scream at him, throw the emails in his face and demand explanations until the walls shook. But fear kept stopping her. Not fear of losing him. That part had already happened. No, this was the deeper kind of fear that came when reality shifted too fast beneath your feet. Because once truth entered a marriage, nothing familiar survived afterward. So Ida stayed quiet and watched. Eli became strangely careful after that night. More private phone calls, more locked doors, more unexplained absences, yet emotionally he behaved almost gentler than before. That confused Ida the most. Sometimes she caught him staring at her with something almost resembling guilt. Other times he acted like she barely existed. It was emotional whiplash. One evening, Ida stood in the kitchen cutting strawberries for a charity brunch when Eli walked in unexpectedly pale. Not tired, not stressed. Pale. His hand gripped the marble counter briefly like he needed support. "Eli, I'm fine." But his voice sounded strained. A second later, he staggered slightly. The glass in his hand shattered across the floor. Ida rushed forward instinctively. Jesus Christ, Eli collapsed before she could finish. Everything after that happened in fragments. Sirens, hospital lights, doctors moving quickly through hallways smelling like antiseptic and fear. Ida sat in the emergency waiting area gripping her own shaking hands while rain hammered the hospital windows outside. Nobody from the Carter family had arrived yet. Nobody except Sabrina. Of course, Sabrina. She appeared 40 minutes later in an expensive beige coat, breathless and dramatic. Their eyes locked instantly across the waiting room. For a second, neither woman spoke, and in that silence, something horrifying passed between them. Recognition. Not introduction. Recognition. Sabrina knew that Ida knew. The realization made Ida feel physically ill. "How is he?" Sabrina asked quietly. Not awkwardly, not cautiously. Like someone with the right to ask. Ida stared at her. "You tell me." Sabrina's expression flickered. Only briefly. Then the mask returned. Before either woman could continue, Dr. Leonard Hayes approached holding a tablet. Mrs. Carter Ida stood immediately. "We need to discuss your husband's condition." Condition. The word made her stomach tighten. Dr. Hayes led her into a private consultation room. Soft lighting, muted walls, a box of tissues already waiting on the table. Rooms designed specifically for devastation. Ida sat slowly. "What's happening?" she whispered. Dr. Hayes hesitated. That hesitation changed everything before he even spoke. "Your husband has stage 4 pancreatic cancer." The world stopped. Not emotionally. Physically. Like sound itself vanished from the room. Ida blinked at him. "I'm sorry." "What?" "He was diagnosed 7 months ago." 7 months. 7 months. Her mind repeated the number mechanically because the meaning refused to settle. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He never told me." Dr. Hayes looked genuinely uncomfortable now. He asked us to keep his medical information private. Ida stared at the floor. 7 months. While she planned dinners, hosted galas, bought anniversary gifts, cried herself to sleep wondering why her husband no longer loved her. He had known he was dying. And he said nothing. A sharp ache spread through her chest so suddenly she pressed a hand against it. Not just grief, humiliation. Because somehow even his illness had become another form of exclusion, another secret she wasn't important enough to share. "How long?" Ida finally asked. Dr. Hayes chose his words carefully. "With treatment, perhaps a year, maybe less." Ida closed her eyes. For one terrible second, memories attacked her all at once. Eli teaching her how to drive stick shift, their wedding vows, late-night pizza on apartment floors before money arrived, the first time he said he wanted children. All those moments now felt haunted by the man he eventually became. "Can I see him?" she asked quietly. Dr. Hayes nodded. Eli looked smaller in the hospital bed somehow. Weaker. The sharp edges of his ambitions softened beneath fluorescent light and exhaustion. For the first time in years, Ida saw something vulnerable in him. And despite everything, despite Sabrina, despite the lies, despite the betrayal, her heart still broke. That was the tragedy of loving someone toxic. Love didn't disappear the second respect did. Sometimes it stayed long after it should have died. Eli opened his eyes slowly when she entered. For a moment, confusion crossed his face. Then irritation. Not comfort, not relief. Irritation. "You shouldn't be here this late," he muttered weakly. Ida almost laughed from disbelief. "You collapsed." "I'm fine. You have cancer." Silence. Eli looked away immediately. That hurt more than tears would have. "How long were you planning to hide it from me?" Ida asked. His jaw tightened. "I didn't want pity. You told Sabrina." His eyes snapped toward her instantly. There it was. Fear. Finally. "Who told you that?" Ida ignored the question. "You let me sit beside you every day while you lied to my face." Eli rubbed tiredly at his forehead. You don't understand. No, Ida whispered. I really don't. For several seconds, the room filled only with the steady beeping of monitors. Then Eli sighed heavily. I was trying to handle things. The same cold corporate language he used for business crises. Not marriage. Not love. Management. Control. Ida suddenly realized Eli approached relationships the same way he approached negotiations. Who had leverage? Who had information? Who remained useful? A vibration buzzed against the bedside table. Eli immediately reached for his phone. Ida saw Sabrina's name flash across the screen before he tilted it away. Something inside her cracked quietly. Even now, even here, he still chose Sabrina first. You should rest, Ida said softly. Eli looked up at her, then finally noticing the emotional distance in her voice. For the first time all night, uncertainty crossed his expression. Ida. But she was already stepping away. Outside the hospital room, Margaret Carter arrived dramatically with Gavin close behind. Margaret embraced Eli instantly when she entered. Then she turned toward Ida with a strange expression. Not sympathy. Calculation. You knew, Ida asked her quietly. Margaret paused. Too long. Of course she knew. Everyone knew except the wife. The humiliation nearly crushed Ida where she stood. Gavin avoided eye contact completely. Coward. As the family gathered around Eli, Ida suddenly felt like a stranger watching someone else's life. Nobody reached for her. Nobody comforted her. She stood alone beside the doorway while Sabrina slipped silently into the room moments later. And nobody stopped her. Not Margaret. Not Gavin. Not even Eli. That image branded itself into Ida's memory permanently. The mistress standing comfortably beside the family while the wife stood outside the circle. Hours later, Ida returned home alone. The mansion felt enormous and empty. She wandered through dark hallways like a ghost. Then she noticed the office light downstairs. Eli must have left it on earlier. For reasons she couldn't explain, Ida walked inside. The desk drawers remained slightly open from her earlier search. Files scattered everywhere. Medical records, financial documents, legal papers, and there, half hidden beneath a folder, sat a document from a private law firm. Carter Holdings Estate Restructuring. Her pulse quickened instantly. Ida opened the folder carefully. Pages of revised trusts, asset transfers, beneficiary changes, signatures, dates, most of them completed after Eli's diagnosis, meaning while he knew he was dying, he was secretly restructuring everything. Without her. A chill spread through Ida's body. This wasn't panic planning. It was intentional. Strategic. And suddenly she remembered the email again. After the funeral, Ida won't have anything left. Funeral. Not metaphorical. Literal. Ida stared at the paperwork in horror. Eli wasn't simply preparing for death. He was preparing for her destruction after it. Then her phone rang unexpectedly. Unknown number. Ida answered cautiously. Mrs. Carter. Yes, this is Evelyn Brooks. I was Walter Carter's attorney. Ida straightened immediately. Walter. Her chest tightened painfully. I need to meet with you, Evelyn continued. There are things your husband never intended for you to discover. Evelyn Brooks chose a restaurant with no windows. Ida noticed that immediately. The private dining room sat hidden behind a quiet steakhouse in downtown Chicago, far from the polished social circles the Carter family controlled. No reporters, no investors, no familiar faces. Just dark wood walls, low amber lighting, and the feeling that something irreversible was about to happen. Evelyn Brooks looked exactly like the kind of attorney powerful men feared. Silver blonde hair cut sharply at her jawline. Navy-tailored suit. Calm eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She stood as Ida entered. Mrs. Carter. Please, Ida said tiredly, slipping into the chair across from her. Just Ida. Evelyn nodded once. You look exhausted. Ida almost laughed. My husband is dying. He cheated on me for years. His family treats me like an inconvenience, and apparently, he's been restructuring his estate behind my back. A pause. So yes, Ida whispered. I'm exhausted. For a brief second, something softer crossed Evelyn's expression. Not pity. Respect. Walter warned me this would happen, Evelyn said quietly. Ida froze. The waitress poured water silently before leaving. Only after the door closed did Evelyn slide a thick cream-colored envelope across the table. Walter Carter's handwriting stretched across the front. For Ida. Her throat tightened instantly. Walter had died 11 months earlier, after a long battle with heart failure. And despite everything rotten inside the Carter family, Walter had always been kind to her. Not performatively kind, not socially polite. Real. Ida picked up the envelope carefully, like it might break apart in her hands. You knew him better than his own children did, Evelyn said. Tears burned unexpectedly behind Ida's eyes. No, she whispered. I just took care of him. That's exactly my point. Ida stared down at the envelope for several seconds before finally opening it. Inside sat a handwritten letter folded neatly in half. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. Ida, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry. First, I need you to understand something clearly. None of what happened to you inside this family was your fault. Ida closed her eyes briefly. One sentence. That was all it took to nearly destroy her emotionally. Because nobody had ever said those words to her before. Not once. Walter's handwriting continued across the page. I watched you spend years loving people who only valued what you could do for them. You gave loyalty to people who considered loyalty weakness. That includes my son. Ida swallowed hard. A memory surfaced instantly. Walter sitting beside the fireplace one snowy December evening while Ida brought him tea. You know what the problem with powerful families is? He asked her quietly that night. She smiled. What? We mistake survival skills for character. At the time, she hadn't understood. Now she did. Walter's letter continued. Eli was not always this man, but ambition changes people when they start worshiping power more than integrity. I tried to warn him. He stopped listening. Ida pressed trembling fingers against her lips. Part of her hated reading criticism about Eli. Another part knew every word was true. Evelyn remained silent across the table, allowing her space to absorb everything. The next paragraph shattered her completely. You loved my son honestly. I saw it every day. And because of that, I need to apologize for what this family allowed to happen to you. Ida looked away quickly as tears finally spilled down her face. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet grief, the kind caused by finally being seen after years of invisibility. Walter had seen her. All along. You were there when he was sick, Evelyn said gently. Every single day. Ida nodded weakly. Margaret visited twice a week at most. Gavin almost never came unless money was involved. But you, Evelyn leaned back slightly. Walter trusted you. Ida laughed bitterly through tears. Trust doesn't seem very useful anymore. Evelyn's expression sharpened immediately. That depends on what someone leaves behind. A strange chill moved through Ida's stomach. Evelyn reached beside her chair and removed a leather portfolio. Inside were documents. Official, legal, dangerous-looking. Before Walter died, Evelyn said carefully, he made changes to the Carter Holdings succession structure. Ida frowned immediately. I don't understand. You're not supposed to yet. Evelyn slid one document toward her. Transfer of voting authority. Conditional trustee structure. Ida blinked. What is this? It's protection. For who? For you. Silence swallowed the room. Evelyn folded her hands together calmly. Walter suspected financial misconduct inside Carter Holdings before his death. He also suspected Eli was being manipulated. Sabrina, Ida whispered. Evelyn's eyes flickered. So you know about her. I know enough. No, Evelyn replied quietly. You don't. The temperature in the room suddenly felt colder. Evelyn continued carefully. Walter hired investigators during his final year alive. Certain transactions connected to charitable foundations raised concerns. Ida stared at her. Sabrina works with charity boards. Yes, and several shell entities. A pulse of nausea hit Ida instantly. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was corruption. Maybe even criminal. Evelyn slid another document forward. This codicil activates upon specific conditions tied to Eli's incapacity or death. Ida barely processed the words. Her mind still clung desperately to one horrifying truth Eli knew. Walter knew. And everyone had been moving pieces around her for months while she kept trying to save a marriage already collapsing beneath lies. Why didn't Walter tell me directly? Ida whispered. Evelyn's face softened slightly. Because he hoped he was wrong. That answer hurt most of all. Because hope had destroyed Ida too. Evelyn leaned forward now, voice quieter. Walter told me something before he died. Ida looked up slowly. He said, if my son keeps choosing ego over loyalty, Ida will eventually become the strongest person in the room. A painful laugh escaped Ida before she could stop it. Strong, she whispered. I can barely breathe right now. That's grief, Evelyn said calmly. Not weakness. Ida looked down at the legal papers again. So what exactly does this mean? It means Eli's will is not the only legal authority that matters. A dangerous silence filled the room. Evelyn opened another folder slowly. Inside sat ownership charts, corporate structures, trust agreements, voting percentages, and one highlighted section near the bottom. Temporary controlling trustee, Ida Nichols Carter. Ida stared at the words in disbelief. No, she said immediately. There's no way Eli would allow that. He didn't know. Ida's head snapped upward. Evelyn nodded once. Walter changed the structure privately during the final revision process. The codicil remained sealed under attorney-client privilege. For the first time in weeks, something other than pain entered Ida's chest. Shock. Because suddenly the narrative shifted. Everyone believed she was the powerless wife about to lose everything. But Walter had quietly placed a weapon in her hands before he died. And nobody else knew. Not Eli, not Margaret, not Gavin, not Sabrina. Ida leaned back, slowly overwhelmed. I don't want revenge, she whispered after a long silence. Evelyn studied her carefully. That may be true today. The wording unsettled Ida. Today. Not forever. You think they'll try to destroy me? Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Then I think they already are. That landed like a knife. Because it was true. Eli wasn't protecting her financially. He was preparing to erase her after his death. Margaret already treated Sabrina like a replacement wife. Gavin saw Ida as disposable. And Sabrina, God. Sabrina looked at her like prey. A cold realization settled fully into place. Ida had spent years trying to earn love from people who only valued leverage. Evelyn slid one final envelope across the table. What's this? The second will. Ida stared at it silently. The envelope suddenly felt heavier than anything she had ever held. Do not show anyone yet, Evelyn warned, especially not Eli. Because once the Carter family realizes you are no longer powerless, Evelyn paused carefully. They will become very dangerous. Outside thunder rolled softly over the Chicago skyline. Ida looked down at Walter's letter one final time. You were the only one in that house who loved without calculation. For the first time in years, Ida felt something unfamiliar beginning to grow beneath the grief. Not revenge, not yet, but awareness. And awareness was where powerful women were born. The Carter estate looked beautiful at night. That was the problem with wealthy families. From the outside, everything gleamed. The white stone mansion glowed beneath golden exterior lights, while classical music drifted softly through the open dining room windows. Expensive landscaping lined the curved driveway with mathematical perfection. Elegance everywhere. Rot underneath. Ida sat in her car for nearly 3 minutes before going inside. She almost turned around twice, not because she was afraid of Margaret Carter, not even because of Gavin. She was afraid of the version of herself that used to walk into this house desperate to be loved. That woman had tolerated humiliation for years. Tonight felt different somehow. The butler opened the door before she reached it. Mrs. Carter? Still Mrs. Carter. For now. The scent of rosemary and red wine floated through the hallway as Ida stepped inside. Margaret had always believed conflict should happen over expensive meals. Appearances mattered more than sincerity in families like this. The dining room looked exactly as Ida remembered. Long mahogany table, crystal glasses, fresh orchids, coldness disguised as sophistication. Margaret sat at the head of the table wearing ivory silk and diamonds. Not morning black. Diamonds. Of course. Gavin lounged beside her, scrolling through his phone lazily. Then Ida noticed the fourth place setting. Her stomach tightened instantly. Sabrina Vale entered carrying a bottle of wine like she belonged there. No embarrassment, no shame, no attempt to pretend. Sabrina smiled gently when she saw Ida. "Ida," she said softly, "I'm so sorry about everything." The audacity nearly stole Ida's breath. But instead of reacting emotionally, Ida did something new. She observed. That was all. An observation changed power dynamics completely. Because when you stop begging for respect, you finally notice who never intended to give it. Margaret gestured toward the table. "Sit down, dear. Dear. Interesting." They only used soft tones when they wanted something. Dinner began quietly. Too quietly. The kind of silence that vibrated beneath the surface with hidden agendas. Margaret discussed funeral arrangements while Gavin complained about investors panicking after Eli's hospitalization. Meanwhile, Sabrina poured wine comfortably beside them like she had attended family dinners for years. Maybe she had. Ida suddenly wondered how many times she had unknowingly hosted the woman sleeping with her husband. The realization should have shattered her. Instead, it made her strangely calm. Pain eventually reached a point where it transformed into clarity. Margaret folded her napkin delicately. The funeral should remain tasteful, she said. No unnecessary emotional displays. Ida looked at her. Interesting thing to say about a funeral. Margaret ignored the comment. "We've also been discussing the estate situation." There it was. Straight to business. Gavin finally looked up from his phone. "Things could get messy legally," he muttered, "especially with media attention." Sabrina nodded sympathetically. As someone who works with public foundations, scandals can become very damaging. Ida almost smiled. Public foundations. Such elegant wording for money laundering. Evelyn Brooks' warnings echoed loudly in her mind now. Watch them carefully. So she did. Margaret leaned forward slightly. Eli always carried tremendous pressure. We all want to protect his legacy. His legacy. Not his marriage. Not his wife. His image. I agree, Ida said calmly. Margaret seemed encouraged by the response. Good. Then perhaps we can avoid unnecessary complications. There it was again. Complications. They spoke about Ida's future like she was a legal inconvenience attached to Eli's death. Not a grieving spouse, not a human being. A complication. Sabrina finally spoke softly. I know this must be overwhelming for you. Ida turned toward her slowly. Sabrina held her wine glass carefully between manicured fingers. Perfect posture, perfect makeup, perfect performance. The kind of woman who weaponized softness. Ida recognized the type now. You're very involved for someone outside the family, Ida replied evenly. A tiny flicker crossed Sabrina's face. Margaret immediately intervened. Sabrina has been helping tremendously with Eli's charity obligations. Of course she had. Ida noticed Gavin avoiding eye contact completely now. Guilt. Interesting. Dinner continued with forced politeness, but beneath the conversation, tension thickened steadily. Finally, Gavin sighed dramatically. "We should just be honest." Margaret shot him a warning glance. Too late. Gavin leaned back in his chair. "The company can't survive ugly probate fights right now." Ida stayed quiet. "We're suggesting a cleaner arrangement," he continued. "For everyone. Arrangement. Another sanitized word for betrayal." Margaret reached calmly beside her plate and removed a folder. She slid it across the table toward Ida. "Just temporary paperwork." Ida didn't touch it. What kind of paperwork? A voluntary waiver. There it was. Finally honest. "You want me to surrender my rights?" Margaret's expression hardened slightly. "We want stability." "No," Ida replied softly. "You want control." Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Gavin exhaled impatiently. "Come on, Ida. Don't make this emotional." That sentence nearly made her laugh out loud. Because men always called women emotional after emotionally destroying them. Margaret's tone sharpened subtly now. "You've been under considerable stress lately. We understand grief can cloud judgment. Gaslighting, clean, elegant, professional, but still gaslighting." Ida looked around the table slowly. The mother, the mistress, the brother, all united comfortably against her. And suddenly she understood something devastating. These people had probably expected her to collapse emotionally long ago. They expected tears, begging, confusion, weakness. Instead, Ida quietly reached into her purse. Not for the documents. For her phone. She pressed record silently beneath the tablecloth. Then she looked up calmly. "What exactly do you think happens to me after Eli dies?" The room froze. Margaret recovered first. "No one said you implied it." Sabrina shifted uncomfortably now. "Good," Ida continued quietly. "Do I disappear? Move out quietly. Pretend none of this happened while Eli's mistress takes my place at family dinners." Sabrina inhaled sharply. Margaret's mask cracked for the first time all evening. "You're being inappropriate." "No," Ida said softly. "I'm finally being honest." Gavin scoffed. "Jesus Christ." Margaret's voice turned icy. "You need to think carefully before embarrassing yourself publicly." There it was. The threat underneath the sophistication. Ida leaned back slowly. For years, she said quietly, "I blamed myself for everything wrong in this family." Nobody interrupted her now. "I thought if I loved harder, worked harder, forgave more." Her throat tightened briefly. "Eventually I'd matter to you people." Margaret looked almost bored. And somehow that hurt worse than cruelty. Then Margaret delivered the sentence that changed everything. "You were never truly family, Ida." Silence crashed through the room. Even Gavin looked uncomfortable afterward. But Sabrina looked relieved. Because finally the truth sat openly on the table. Ida stared at Margaret for several long seconds. And strangely enough, she felt nothing. No devastation, no panic. Just release. Because hearing the cruel truth out loud freed her from years of chasing approval she was never going to receive. Walter had been right. These people only valued leverage. Not loyalty, not kindness, not love. Ida looked toward Sabrina slowly. "Was it exciting?" she asked quietly. Sabrina blinked. "What?" "Sleeping with my husband while smiling in my face at charity galas." Margaret immediately stood. "That's enough." But Ida ignored her. Sabrina swallowed visibly now. "I never meant to hurt you." The lie landed flat instantly. Ida smiled faintly for the first time in weeks. And that smile unsettled everyone at the table. Because it wasn't broken anymore. It was controlled. "You know what's fascinating?" Ida said softly. Nobody answered. "You all spent years mistaking my kindness for weakness." Even Margaret looked uneasy now. Ida slowly pushed the untouched folder back across the table. "I won't be signing anything tonight." Gavin's expression darkened immediately. "You don't understand how ugly this can become." Ida stood calmly. For years, standing up inside this house had made her feel small. Tonight felt different. Tonight she finally understood something powerful. People only controlled you as long as you needed their approval, and Ida didn't anymore. Margaret's voice followed her toward the doorway. "If you fight this, you'll regret it." Ida turned slowly. Then she smiled again. Small, cold, terrifyingly calm. "No," she said quietly. "I think eventually all of you will." And for the first time since entering the Carter family, Margaret Carter looked afraid of her. The morning after dinner at the Carter estate, Ida Nichols woke up feeling strangely empty. Not peaceful, not healed, just emptied out. Like someone had finally drained years of anxiety from her body and left behind only silence. For the first time in a decade, she no longer cared whether Margaret Carter approved of her. That realization felt both liberating and horrifying, because when a woman stops needing validation, she becomes unpredictable. And powerful families hated unpredictable women. Rain tapped softly against the penthouse windows, while Ida sat alone in Eli's office surrounded by financial documents. The room still smelled faintly like his cologne. Cedarwood, bergamot, familiar enough to hurt. She stared at the ownership charts Evelyn Brooks had given her the night before. None of it made sense emotionally. Walter Carter, the man everyone underestimated because of age and illness, had quietly rebuilt the power structure of Carter Holdings behind his family's backs. And somehow, he had placed Ida directly in the center of it. Her phone buzzed sharply. "Evelyn, tell me you didn't sign anything last night." Ida almost smiled. "I didn't." "Good," Evelyn replied immediately. "Because things are escalating faster than expected." Ida's stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means Gavin's already trying to move money." "Of course he was." Evelyn continued calmly. "I need you downtown within the hour." The law office overlooked the Chicago River from the 38th floor. Everything inside felt expensive, controlled, efficient. Very Evelyn Brooks. Ida followed Evelyn into a private conference room where stacks of legal folders already covered the table. But someone else was there too. A tall man in a navy suit stood near the windows reviewing documents. Dark hair streaked lightly with gray. Serious eyes. Late 40s. He looked up immediately as Ida entered. Ida Evelyn said, "This is Daniel Mercer, Carter Holdings CFO." Daniel extended his hand politely. His grip was steady, respectful, not patronizing. "I'm sorry about everything you're dealing with," he said quietly. Something about the sincerity in his voice nearly caught Ida off guard. She had spent so long around manipulative people that genuine kindness now felt unfamiliar. Daniel sat back down carefully. "I worked closely with Walter for years," he explained. "He trusted you." The statement hit her harder than expected, because trust had become such a rare thing in her life. Evelyn opened a folder. "Let's get directly to the problem." That sounded ominous. She slid several financial statements toward Ida. At first, Walter suspected small accounting irregularities, Evelyn explained. But after his death, things accelerated. Daniel nodded grimly. Corporate funds started moving through nonprofit partnerships connected to Sabrina Vale. Ida stared at him. So Walter was right. Yes. Daniel's expression darkened. The numbers suggest money laundering. The room fell silent. Ida suddenly remembered every glamorous charity gala Sabrina hosted, every speech about empowerment, every polished smile. All of it built on corruption. Evelyn folded her hands, and Gavin Carter appears heavily involved. Ida let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. That family really destroys everything it touches, doesn't it? Neither of them answered, because the answer was obvious. Daniel turned another document toward her. "This is the current voting structure of Carter Holdings." Ida frowned down at the chart. Most shares remained distributed between family trusts, but highlighted in gold near the center sat one section temporary controlling trustee Ida Nichols Carter, 28% controlling authority. Ida blinked repeatedly. "That can't be right." "It is," Evelyn said. "Walter transferred proxy authority before his death." Under the codicil terms, if Eli becomes medically incapacitated, she paused carefully. You temporarily control the voting structure. Ida's pulse began hammering. No one else knows this, not yet. Suddenly the room felt smaller, heavier, because power was terrifying when you never expected to hold it. I don't understand why Walter chose me, Ida whispered. Daniel answered this time. Because you were the only person around Eli who wasn't corrupted by his last name. The sentence lingered heavily between them. Ida looked away. Part of her still struggled to reconcile the man Eli became with the man she once loved. And somehow that grief remained the hardest part. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. Ida listened carefully. The moment the Carter family realizes you have legal authority, they will come after you aggressively. Margaret's face flashed through Ida's mind immediately. Cold, strategic, dangerous. They already hate me. No, Evelyn replied calmly. Right now they underestimate you. That's much safer. A chill moved through Ida's chest, because she understood exactly what Evelyn meant. Weak women were tolerated. Powerful women became threats. Daniel slid another folder across the table. There's more. Inside were transaction histories, private transfers, luxury purchases, offshore accounts. The deeper Ida looked, the sicker she felt. Eli's signature appeared on many approvals, meaning he knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Why would he risk everything Ida whispered? Daniel hesitated. Then, Eli became obsessed with protecting the Carter image after Walter got sick. Profit started mattering more than ethics. Ida closed the folder slowly. No, she corrected softly. Control mattered more. That was the real addiction. Not money, not success. Control. Evelyn studied her carefully then. And for the first time, Ida noticed approval in the attorney's eyes. Not because Ida was grieving well, because she was finally seeing clearly. What happens now? Ida asked quietly. Evelyn answered without hesitation. You stay calm. That's it, for now. Ida almost laughed bitterly. My husband is dying. His mistress helped hide financial crimes. His family tried to pressure me into surrendering my rights over dinner, and somehow I'm temporarily controlling a billion-dollar company. A pause. And your advice is stay calm. Yes. Evelyn's voice remained perfectly steady. Because panic is exactly what they expect from you. That sentence changed something inside Ida. For years, every emotional reaction she had ever shown became ammunition against her. Too sensitive, too emotional, too fragile. But what if calmness itself became power? Daniel spoke carefully. There's something else you should know. Ida looked up. Eli never found out Walter changed the structure. Her breath caught slightly. What? Walter finalized the revisions privately during hospice care. Only Evelyn and 2 board attorneys were present, meaning Eli died believing Ida would remain powerless. The irony almost felt poetic. Ida stood slowly and walked toward the conference room windows. Chicago stretched endlessly below her. Massive buildings, sharp steel lines, people rushing through lives that looked stable from far away. She remembered the version of herself from 6 months ago, the woman desperately trying to save her marriage, trying to earn affection, trying to become enough for people determined not to value her. That woman felt distant now. Not gone, but changing. You know what's strange, Ida said quietly without turning around. Neither Evelyn nor Daniel interrupted. I used to think strength looked loud. She stared out at the skyline. Now I think real strength is staying calm while people underestimate you. Silence followed. Then Evelyn smiled faintly. Walter would have liked hearing that. A sharp ache hit Ida's chest unexpectedly, because Walter had believed in her before she believed in herself. And now he was gone. Her phone buzzed suddenly. Unknown number. Ida answered cautiously. Hello? A woman's voice responded immediately. Cold, smooth, dangerously familiar. Sabrina and Margaret are already planning the funeral seating chart, the woman whispered. And they're discussing where you'll move afterward. Ida froze. Who is this? I work for the Carter family, the voice replied nervously. And if I were you, a shaky breath, I'd stop assuming they plan on leaving you anything. The call disconnected instantly. Slowly, Ida lowered the phone from her ear. Then, for the first time since this nightmare began, she smiled. Not because she was happy, because she finally understood the game. And she was done playing defense. By the morning of Eli Carter's funeral, Ida Nichols felt strangely detached from her own life. Like she was watching herself move through someone else's tragedy. Black dress, black heels, black gloves, the perfect widow costume. Outside the cathedral, black luxury vehicles lined the street while reporters waited behind barricades, hoping to capture grief through camera lenses. Carter Holdings executives entered in tailored suits. Socialites whispered behind oversized sunglasses. Politicians arrived with carefully rehearsed sympathy. Everyone came for the performance. Because wealthy funerals were rarely about mourning. They were about optics. The cathedral itself looked breathtaking. Towering white columns, gold candlelight flickering against stained glass. Soft violin music drifting through the air like controlled sorrow. Beautiful enough to distract people from the ugliness underneath. Ida stepped inside slowly. Conversations immediately softened around her. Not out of respect, out of curiosity. She could feel it everywhere. The whispers, the glances, the silent calculations. Poor Ida. What will happen to her now? Did Eli leave her anything? Will Sabrina replace her publicly? Humiliation had become almost physical now. A living thing breathing beside her. Margaret Carter stood near the front greeting guests like royalty receiving condolences after a national tragedy. Elegant black gown, perfect makeup, dry eyes. When she noticed Ida approaching her, smile tightened slightly. Ida, Margaret said softly, "You're late." The cruelty of that sentence nearly made Ida laugh. Late. To her own husband's funeral. Traffic would have been the normal response. Instead, Ida simply replied, "I needed air." Margaret nodded distantly before turning immediately toward a senator and his wife. Dismissed again. Some things never changed. Then Sabrina arrived, and suddenly every eye in the cathedral shifted. She wore black silk and diamonds subtle enough to appear tasteful, but expensive enough to command attention. Her dark hair fell perfectly against her shoulders. Graceful, controlled, devastatingly composed. And on her wrist sat Ida's missing anniversary bracelet. The bracelet Eli gave Ida 5 years earlier after promising they would always choose each other. Now it glittered against Sabrina's skin like a trophy. Ida stared at it silently. Sabrina noticed. For one brief second, guilt flickered across her expression, then vanished. Interesting. Ida realized something important in that moment. Sabrina expected emotional collapse. Everyone did. That expectation gave Ida an advantage. "You look beautiful," Sabrina said softly as she approached. The audacity nearly deserved applause. Ida looked directly at the bracelet. "So do you." Sabrina instinctively touched her wrist. "Good. Let her feel uncomfortable," Margaret interrupted before tension could deepen. "The service is beginning." Rows of wealthy mourners filled the cathedral quickly. Ida sat alone in the front pew while Margaret positioned Sabrina only 2 rows behind the immediate family section. Not hidden, not distant, visible, almost acknowledged. The disrespect felt deliberate now. But strangely enough, Ida no longer felt desperate enough to fight for dignity in rooms determined to deny it. That realization changed everything. The priest began speaking about Eli, brilliant businessman, loyal son, generous leader. Ida nearly looked behind herself to see who he was describing, because the Eli Carter she knew during the last few years had become emotionally hollow, manipulative, secretive, hungry for control. But funerals transformed complicated men into polished memories. Nobody wanted truth near a casket. As the ceremony continued, Ida noticed Sabrina quietly crying into a handkerchief. Performative tears, Beautiful tears, the kind designed for witnesses. Meanwhile, Ida sat completely still. No tears left, no energy left for performance. At one point, the priest spoke softly about marriage. True love, he said, is built on loyalty. Ida almost laughed out loud. She actually had to press her nails into her palm to stop herself. Loyalty. What a fascinating word to use at a funeral attended by a mistress. A memory suddenly surfaced without warning. Eli standing in their kitchen years earlier after forgetting their anniversary dinner entirely. "You know I love you," he told her impatiently. Back then, Ida accepted words instead of behavior. Now she understood something painful. Love without respect eventually becomes emotional imprisonment. The choir began singing softly. People bowed their heads, and through the music, Ida suddenly noticed movement near the cathedral entrance. Evelyn Brooks, sharp navy coat, calm expression, dangerous composure. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Evelyn gave the smallest nod. Everything was ready. Ida's pulse quickened for the first time all morning. Because this funeral wasn't only about grief anymore, it was about revelation. After the ceremony ended, mourners moved toward the private reception hall attached to the cathedral. Champagne, flowers, low piano music, more performance. Gavin immediately gathered executives near the bar pretending to discuss business continuity. Margaret floated elegantly between guests accepting condolences like a politician during campaign season. And Sabrina stayed close to the family. Too close. At one point, an elderly board member actually squeezed Sabrina's hand sympathetically. "We're here for you too, dear." Ida watched the interaction from across the room. Nobody corrected him. Not Margaret, not Gavin, not Sabrina herself. The replacement had already begun. Oddly enough, the realization no longer wounded Ida the way it would have weeks earlier. Because once illusion died, disappointment lost its power. Daniel Mercer approached quietly beside her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You okay?" Ida accepted one glass carefully. "That depends. On what? How much destruction happens in the next hour?" A faint smile touched Daniel's mouth despite the tension. "You're calmer than I expected." Ida looked around the room slowly. At the greed, the manipulation, the arrogance hidden beneath luxury. "For years they convinced me emotions made me weak," she said quietly. Daniel studied her carefully. And now Ida took a slow sip of champagne. "Now I think emotions just made me easier to control." Across the room, Sabrina suddenly noticed Evelyn speaking privately with several attorneys near the reception entrance. Something shifted instantly in her face. Fear. Small but visible. Interesting. Margaret noticed too. The older woman's composure tightened almost imperceptibly. Good. Let them wonder. Let them worry. For once. Evelyn crossed the room calmly toward Ida. Conversation softened as she passed. Power recognized power instinctively. "We're ready," Evelyn said quietly. Margaret immediately approached. Ready for what? Evelyn turned professionally. "The legal reading." Margaret blinked. "That was scheduled privately for tomorrow." Evelyn's expression never changed. "Mrs. Carter requested it happen today." Every eye turned toward Ida instantly. The room shifted. Confusion. Curiosity. Tension. Gavin frowned immediately. "What exactly are you doing?" Ida set down her champagne glass carefully. Then she looked directly at Margaret, at Sabrina, at every person who spent years underestimating her. And finally she spoke. "I think," Ida said softly, "everyone deserves to hear the truth while we're all together." Silence crashed through the reception hall. Sabrina's face lost color first. Margaret recovered quickly. "This is inappropriate." "No," Ida replied calmly. "What's inappropriate is pretending we're still a family." The room went completely still. Even the piano music seemed too loud suddenly. Evelyn opened her leather briefcase slowly. And for the first time that entire day, Margaret Carter looked uncertain. Then Evelyn removed the first sealed envelope. and Sabrina Vale stopped breathing. The reception hall became so quiet that Ida could hear the faint clink of ice settling inside untouched champagne glasses. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Evelyn Brooks placed the sealed envelope carefully on the long mahogany table at the center of the room, while dozens of wealthy guests watched with growing discomfort. Funerals were supposed to end with polite grief, not tension sharp enough to cut skin. Margaret Carter stepped forward first. "This is unnecessary," she said coldly. Evelyn didn't even look at her. "With respect, Mrs. Carter, your son's legal directives are very necessary." That sentence landed like a slap. Several board members exchanged nervous glances. Gavin loosened his tie aggressively. And Sabrina looked pale. Good. Ida stood near the windows, quietly observing all of them. For years, she would have panicked in moments like this, apologized, tried to smooth tension away before anyone became uncomfortable. But grief had burned something out of her, and in the empty space left behind, clarity had finally grown. Evelyn opened the first document slowly. As legal counsel representing the estate of Elijah Carter, she began calmly, "I will now read the final will and testament executed under revised authority 6 months ago." Ida noticed several executives discreetly pulling out phones. Word would spread through Chicago before sunset. Eli would have hated public disorder. Ironically, he created it himself. Evelyn continued reading. The opening sections sounded predictable. Investment allocations, charitable pledges, corporate distribution clauses. Margaret visibly relaxed with every paragraph. Of course she did. She thought she already knew how this story ended. Then came Ida's section. Evelyn paused briefly before reading aloud. "To my wife, Ida Nichols Carter. I leave the property located on Hawthorne Avenue along with a discretionary support trust totaling $250,000. Silence. Then came the whispers. $250,000 for a billionaire executive's wife. Humiliating. Intentional. Ida kept her expression perfectly still, even though her chest tightened painfully. Not because of the money, because of the cruelty. After 14 years of marriage, that was what Eli believed she deserved. A house and controlled allowance payments, like compensation for temporary service. Margaret lowered her eyes smugly. Gavin exhaled softly in relief. And Sabrina actually smiled. Small, victorious. Evelyn continued. To Sabrina Vale, under private trust allocation, I leave the condominium property located at Gasps, rippled quietly across the room. There it was. Public confirmation. The mistress. The hidden trust. No more pretending. Margaret immediately straightened. Private allocations should not be discussed publicly. Evelyn finally looked at her. The estate instructions contain no confidentiality restrictions. Margaret's jaw tightened. Beautiful. Ida realized something fascinating, then powerful people hated transparency more than scandal. Sabrina looked frozen now, exposed, cornered, but still arrogant enough to stand beside the family. A woman in pearls near the back whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "My God." The humiliation should have satisfied Ida. Instead, she just felt tired, because betrayal stopped feeling dramatic after enough repetition. It simply became truth. Evelyn continued through the remaining financial distributions, while the atmosphere inside the room deteriorated steadily. Board members looked uneasy. Investors whispered quietly. Several guests avoided looking at Ida altogether. Nobody knew where to place their sympathy now. Then Evelyn closed the document. That concludes Eli Carter's final will and testament. Margaret immediately stepped forward. Thank you. We'll continue private discussions tomorrow. She tried to reclaim control too quickly, too desperately. Evelyn didn't move. Actually, she said calmly, there is an additional legal document. Everything stopped again. Margaret blinked slowly. What Evelyn opened her leather portfolio. The following codicil was drafted under Walter Carter's authority and remains fully enforceable under Illinois corporate succession law. For the first time all afternoon, Margaret Carter looked afraid. Real fear, not irritation, not social discomfort. Fear. Gavin stepped forward immediately. That's impossible. Evelyn ignored him completely. She unfolded the second document. Ida already knew what it said, but hearing it aloud still made her pulse pound violently. Due to concerns regarding fiduciary misconduct and corporate vulnerability, temporary controlling trustee authority of Carter Holdings shall transfer to Ida Nichols Carter upon the medical incapacitation or death of Elijah Carter. The room exploded. What? That can't be legal. Walter did what voices collided instantly across the reception hall. Gavin's face turned red with rage. Margaret looked genuinely stunned. And Sabrina looked terrified. Good. Finally. Evelyn continued speaking over the chaos calmly. Mrs. Ida Nichols Carter now retains temporary controlling voting authority over 28% of Carter Holdings' executive structure pending board review. Daniel Mercer stepped beside Evelyn immediately, confirming it, supporting it, legitimizing it, and suddenly everything changed. The room no longer looked at Ida with pity. Now they looked at her with uncertainty, because power changed how people saw women instantly, especially women they once dismissed. Gavin slammed his palm against the table. This is insanity. No, Ida said quietly. The room fell silent immediately. Every eye turned toward her. For years, Ida's voice barely mattered inside the Carter family. Now one sentence stopped an entire room. That she continued calmly is accountability. Margaret stared at her like she was seeing her for the first time. You knew. Not a question. A realization. Ida met her gaze evenly. Yes. The betrayal in Margaret's face almost amused her, as though Ida keeping secrets somehow violated trust. Trust. What a ridiculous word in this room. Gavin pointed angrily. You manipulated this. No, Evelyn interrupted sharply. Walter Carter executed these revisions personally under legal supervision. Sabrina finally found her voice. This is absurd, she whispered. Eli would never have allowed. He didn't know, Ida replied. Silence. Sharp. Violent. Sabrina's expression cracked completely then. Because suddenly she understood something horrifying. All the plans she and Eli built together were incomplete. Walter had outmaneuvered all of them before dying. Ida watched panic spread slowly through the room like spilled ink. Investors whispering, executives calculating, board members reassessing loyalties in real time. Power always shifted fast around money. Margaret recovered first, of course. Women like her survived through emotional control. This changes nothing, she said coldly. Ida almost smiled. No. Margaret stepped closer now. You may hold temporary authority on paper, but you are still emotionally unstable. There it was. The old strategy. Reduce her. Dismiss her. Paint her as fragile. But this time it didn't work. Because Ida finally understood something devastatingly simple. Manipulation only controlled you while you still craved approval from the manipulator. And she didn't anymore. Ida looked directly at Margaret. For years, she said softly, all of you confused silence with weakness. Nobody spoke. You assumed kindness meant submission. Gavin scoffed loudly. You think this makes you powerful? Ida turned toward him slowly. No. A pause. I think the truth makes all of you nervous. Daniel lowered his eyes slightly to hide what looked dangerously close to admiration. Several guests quietly began leaving now. Too much scandal. Too much exposure. The perfect Carter family image was cracking publicly in real time, and everyone could feel it. Margaret suddenly leaned closer to Ida, lowering her voice. You have no idea what you're doing. Ida held her gaze steadily. You're right, she whispered. Because unlike this family, I never spent my life practicing cruelty. That sentence landed hard. Margaret actually stepped back slightly. Then Sabrina spoke quietly from across the room. What happens now? The question sounded smaller than before. Afraid. Good. Ida looked at her carefully, at the bracelet still hanging around her wrist, at the fear replacing arrogance, at the woman who thought she would inherit Ida's life. And finally, calmly, Ida answered, "Oh." A slow breath. Now we find out how much Eli was hiding from all of us. Across the room, Gavin's face lost color instantly. And in that exact moment, Ida knew. There was something even worse buried beneath the Carter Empire, something dangerous enough to terrify them, and she intended to uncover every piece of it. The Carter funeral reception ended in chaos disguised as sophistication. People tried to leave gracefully, but panic had a smell, and Ida could smell it everywhere. Board members whispered near the exits, while reporters outside began receiving leaked information in real time. Wealthy donors suddenly remembered urgent appointments. Investors avoided eye contact completely. The Carter Empire had cracked publicly, and everyone knew it. Margaret Carter stood near the center of the room, clutching a champagne glass hard enough to whiten her knuckles. She still looked elegant, but no longer untouchable. That difference mattered. Gavin stormed toward Ida the second the last outsiders began filtering from the reception hall. "You think this is funny?" he snapped. Ida looked at him calmly. "No, because you just destroyed this family." The irony nearly took her breath away. Destroyed. As if she had been the one cheating, manipulating, stealing, preparing to erase a spouse financially after death. Powerful people always blamed the person exposing the damage instead of the people causing it. Ida finally understood that now. Evelyn Brooks stepped smoothly between them before Gavin could continue. "I'd strongly advise you to lower your voice." Gavin laughed bitterly. "Oh, please. She got lucky." "No," Ida said quietly. Gavin froze. For years, she would have avoided confrontation with him completely. Now she held his gaze steadily. "I got lied to," she continued calmly. "There's a difference." Something dangerous flickered across Gavin's face then. Fear. Tiny, but real. Good. Because Ida had spent too many years being the only frightened person in the room. Margaret approached slowly. "What exactly do you want?" she asked coldly. Interesting question. Not, "How are you grieving?" Not, "Why didn't Eli tell us?" Not, "Can we fix this?" Straight to power. Ida studied her carefully. The expensive pearls, the controlled posture, the woman who raised her sons to worship status more than morality. "I want the truth," Ida answered. Margaret's expression barely shifted. "You're emotional right now." There it was again. The oldest weapon used against women. Emotion. As though betrayal should feel pleasant. As though grief should sound rational. But this time, Ida smiled faintly. "You know," she said softly, "it's fascinating how often cruel people call honesty emotional." Margaret's jaw tightened immediately. Daniel Mercer approached, carrying another folder. His expression looked grim. "We need to discuss the accounts." Gavin immediately stiffened. Too fast. Too defensive. Ida noticed everything now. Daniel opened the folder carefully across the table. These transactions were flagged during internal review. Wire transfers, private foundations, foreign accounts, charity reallocations. The deeper Daniel explained, the uglier everything became. Sabrina finally stepped closer. "This proves nothing." Daniel looked directly at her. "Actually, it proves quite a lot." Sabrina folded her arms. "You're making assumptions." "No," Ida said quietly. "Assumptions are what I made while my husband lied to my face for years." Silence. Daniel slid one particular document forward. "This account routed over $8 million through nonprofit partnerships connected to your foundation." Sabrina's face lost color instantly. "There's probably a misunderstanding." $8 million isn't a misunderstanding," Evelyn replied sharply. Margaret finally intervened. "This discussion should happen privately." "No," Ida answered immediately. Everyone looked at her. And suddenly she realized something terrifying: they were finally listening. Not because they respected her, because they feared what she might reveal next. The shift felt intoxicating and heartbreaking. Because why did women only become visible after they stopped being gentle? Gavin suddenly slammed the folder shut. This is all circumstantial. Ida looked at him carefully. Then she reached slowly into her purse. Every eye followed the movement. Her phone. She placed it quietly on the table and pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room instantly. You were never truly family, Ida. The dinner recording. Silence crashed across the reception hall. Then Gavin's voice followed. The company can't survive ugly probate fights right now. Margaret, again, you should leave with dignity. Every cruel sentence echoed publicly now beneath crystal chandeliers and funeral flowers. Sabrina stared at Ida in disbelief. You recorded us. Ida held her gaze. Yes. Margaret looked genuinely horrified. Not because of the cruelty itself, because someone documented it. That was the thing about privileged people. They rarely feared wrongdoing. They feared exposure. Daniel slowly exhaled beside her. Several remaining executives looked deeply uncomfortable now. Good. Let them sit inside the truth for once. You manipulated this entire situation, Gavin snapped desperately. Ida almost laughed. Manipulated. She stepped closer slowly. For years I defended this family while all of you humiliated me behind closed doors. Nobody interrupted her. You treated loyalty like stupidity. Margaret tried recovering control again. You're grieving irrationally. No. Ida's voice remained calm. Steady, dangerously composed. I'm finally grieving honestly. The room went silent again. And in that silence, Ida realized something profound. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Margaret. Not of Sabrina. Not even of Eli's memory. Pain lost its control over you once truth became more important than approval. Daniel cleared his throat quietly. There's another issue. Everyone turned. He opened a separate folder. Federal auditors contacted Carter Holdings this morning. Gavin went pale instantly. Interesting. Daniel continued carefully. There are ongoing inquiries involving offshore charitable transfers. Sabrina stepped backward slightly. Margaret looked furious now. This conversation ends immediately. No, Evelyn said sharply. Actually, it's just beginning. For the first time in her life, Ida watched powerful people lose control in real time. And it looked ugly. Gavin's composure cracked completely. This is because of you, he hissed toward Ida. You should have just signed the papers. There it was. The truth underneath everything. Submission. That was all they ever wanted from her. Not love, not harmony, compliance. Ida walked slowly toward him until only inches separated them. For years, Gavin towered over conversations through intimidation. Now he looked nervous. Good. You know what your family never understood? Ida asked quietly. Gavin glared at her. What Ida's eyes never left his. You confused my kindness with weakness. The sentence landed like a gunshot. Even Margaret looked shaken by it. Because deep down, they knew it was true. Ida had tolerated cruelty not because she lacked strength, but because she kept choosing peace over retaliation. Until now. A phone buzzed suddenly nearby. Daniel checked the screen, then looked up carefully. The emergency board meeting has been approved. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Final, real, dangerous. Margaret's voice turned icy. You have no idea what kind of war you're starting. Ida looked around the shattered remains of the reception hall, at the funeral flowers, at the whispered panic, at Sabrina clutching her bracelet nervously, at Gavin sweating through anger, at Margaret losing control inch by inch. Then Ida answered softly, No. A pause. I think your family started this war years ago, and for the first time since marrying Eli Carter, Ida Nichols stopped feeling like the weakest person in the room. 3 days after Eli Carter's funeral, Ida Nichols walked into Carter Holdings headquarters wearing white. Not mourning black. White. The decision was intentional. Because she was done dressing like a victim inside buildings built by people who tried to erase her. The lobby of Carter Holdings rose 30 floors above polished marble floors and glass walls overlooking downtown Chicago. Employees moved through security gates clutching coffee and anxiety, while whispers followed Ida the second she entered. Everyone knew. The funeral disaster, the affair, the will, the board emergency meeting. Scandal traveled faster than truth in corporate America. Ida felt eyes tracking her all the way toward the executive elevators. Some sympathetic, some curious, some openly judgmental. For years she would have shrunk beneath that attention. Today she kept walking. Daniel Mercer waited outside the boardroom holding a tablet. "You ready?" he asked quietly. Ida glanced toward the large frosted glass doors ahead. Behind them sat the people who spent years dismissing her as decoration. "No," she admitted honestly. Daniel looked surprised. Then Ida smiled faintly. "But I'm done being afraid." For a second, Daniel's expression softened in a way that felt almost personal. Respect, maybe admiration. Then the boardroom doors opened. Every conversation inside stopped instantly. Long black conference table, floor-to-ceiling windows, city skyline glowing behind sharp suits and expensive watches. Mostly men. Mostly older. Mostly uncomfortable. Margaret Carter sat near the center, already dressed for battle in navy silk and diamonds. Gavin looked furious enough to combust. And Sabrina wasn't supposed to be there. Yet somehow she sat near the far end beside two Foundation executives pretending she belonged in corporate governance discussions. Of course she did. Women like Sabrina survived by attaching themselves to powerful rooms. The board chairman cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mrs. Carter?" Ida stepped inside calmly. "It's Nichols," she corrected. Silence. Small detail. Massive meaning. Margaret's jaw tightened instantly. "Good." Ida took her seat at the table without asking permission. Another first. For years she entered rooms apologetically. Now she entered like someone who finally understood she deserved space. The chairman adjusted papers nervously. As everyone knows, recent events surrounding Carter Holdings require immediate review. Translation: the empire is bleeding. Daniel activated the presentation screens. Financial charts illuminated across the walls. Transfers, shell entities, charitable reallocations, numbers big enough to destroy reputations. The atmosphere changed immediately. No more funeral theatrics. This was real now. Gavin leaned back aggressively. "You're overreacting to accounting inconsistencies." Daniel didn't blink. $8.4 million moved through unverified nonprofit channels. "Which happens constantly in philanthropy," Sabrina interrupted smoothly. Ida finally looked directly at her. The confidence in Sabrina's face looked thinner today. More fragile. "Interesting. Tell me something," Ida said calmly. Sabrina stiffened slightly. "How long did you think I was stupid?" The room froze instantly. Margaret exhaled sharply. "This is inappropriate." "No," Ida replied without looking away from Sabrina. "What's inappropriate is pretending this woman was ever just a charity consultant." Sabrina's expression hardened. "You don't know what Eli told me." The sentence landed harder than expected. Pain flickered briefly through Ida's chest. Because despite everything, part of her still hated hearing another woman speak about her husband intimately. But then she remembered the bracelet, the lies, the dinner, the humiliation, and the pain cooled into steel. "You're right," Ida answered softly. "I don't know what Eli told you." A pause. "But I know what he hid from both of us." That unsettled Sabrina immediately. Good, because the truth was becoming impossible to control now. Daniel continued the financial review carefully. The deeper he explained, the worse the numbers became. Questionable donations, manipulated reporting, executive approvals signed during Eli's treatment period, and Gavin's authorization appeared repeatedly. Sweat formed visibly near Gavin's collar. Margaret finally intervened. This company cannot survive public scandal. Ida turned toward her slowly. That depends on whether the company values truth or image more. Margaret's eyes narrowed. You're enjoying this far too much. The accusation stunned Ida slightly. Enjoying this? As though exposing betrayal felt pleasurable, as though surviving humiliation somehow erased the humiliation itself. Ida leaned forward carefully. For 14 years, she said quietly, I protected this family at the expense of myself. Nobody interrupted. I defended Eli while he lied to me. Her voice remained steady. I cared for Walter while everyone else chased appearances. Now several board members lowered their eyes. Good. Let them feel uncomfortable. I sat at dinner tables where people mocked me openly while I smiled to keep peace. Silence. Then Ida finished softly, So no, Margaret, I'm not enjoying this. That sentence shifted something in the room, because for the first time Ida stopped sounding like an emotional wife. She sounded like a credible witness. Dangerous difference. Daniel cleared his throat carefully. There's another issue involving the Veil Foundation. Sabrina's face drained instantly. Daniel displayed additional records. Foreign transfers, unverified vendors, fake outreach programs. One board member cursed under his breath quietly. Margaret looked horrified now. Not morally horrified, socially horrified, because exposure threatened status. And status was the only thing people like Margaret truly worshipped. This could trigger federal investigation, Daniel said carefully. The room erupted immediately. Voices overlapping, accusations flying, fear spreading. Ida remained silent through all of it. Observing, learning. That was the funny thing about power. The quieter she became, the more people listened when she finally spoke. Gavin suddenly slammed both hands against the table. This is sabotage. Ida finally looked at him. No, she said softly. This is consequence. He pointed toward her furiously. You manipulated the board using grief and legal loopholes. Ida almost smiled. Interesting how men called women manipulative the second women stopped obeying them. You know what I think? She asked calmly. Nobody answered. I think this family got very comfortable underestimating me. The room fell silent again. Even Sabrina looked uneasy now. Ida slowly stood, and somehow standing inside that boardroom felt symbolic, like reclaiming pieces of herself one breath at a time. For years she continued, all of you treated me like I existed around Eli instead of beside him. Margaret looked away first. Not Ida. Margaret, important difference. But here's the problem with dismissing people, Ida said quietly. You stop noticing how much they see. Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on her now with unmistakable respect. And maybe something else. Something softer. Not romance. Not yet. But recognition. Ida noticed it. And surprisingly, it didn't scare her. Because unlike Eli's attention, Daniel's respect didn't feel transactional. Suddenly, Sabrina stood abruptly. This woman is unstable. The old strategy again. Emotional woman. Crazy wife. Bitter widow. Predictable. Ida walked slowly toward Sabrina until only a few feet separated them. Then she looked directly at the bracelet still hanging from Sabrina's wrist. You should keep it. Sabrina blinked. What? The bracelet? Confusion flickered across her face. Ida smiled faintly. It stopped meaning anything valuable the second I learned what it cost me. That sentence hit harder than yelling ever could. Sabrina actually looked wounded. Good. Let her feel something real for once. Then Daniel's phone buzzed sharply. He checked the message, and his expression changed instantly. What is it? Ida asked. Daniel looked up slowly. The press got the financial records. The room exploded into panic. Board members shouting, phones ringing, Margaret turning pale. Gavin cursing violently. But through all the chaos, Ida stood perfectly still, because for the first time in her life, the Carter family was finally losing control instead of her. The headline started before Ida Nichols even reached home. Carter widow seizes control of billion-dollar company secret mistress exposed in funeral will shocker is Ida Nichols destroying her dead husband's legacy. By midnight, her face covered every business blog gossip site and social media feed in Chicago. The internet loved scandal, especially when the scandal involved a beautiful mistress, a dead billionaire, and a wife who refused to collapse quietly. Ida sat alone in the penthouse living room staring at her phone while rain streaked down the windows outside. Every notification felt like another brick hitting glass. Comments flooded endlessly beneath news articles. Gold digger, crazy widow, attention seeker, cold-hearted. Some defended her. Most didn't. Because society loved betrayed women only when they remained soft and broken. The second they fought back, people became uncomfortable. Her phone rang. Nina Nichols. Finally, Ida answered immediately. "Hey, you okay?" Nina asked softly. That question nearly broke her, because nobody else had asked. Not really. Ida closed her eyes briefly. "I don't know." Silence stretched between them. Then Nina sighed. "I'm coming over. You don't have to." "I know," Nina interrupted gently. "That's why I'm coming." An hour later, Nina arrived carrying wine takeout, and the kind of unconditional love Ida forgot still existed. Unlike the polished Carter family, Nina looked real. Messy blonde bun, oversized sweater, concern written openly across her face. The second Ida opened the door, Nina hugged her tightly, and suddenly Ida almost fell apart. Not because of weakness, because safe people made honesty possible. "You've lost weight," Nina muttered. Ida laughed weakly. "My husband died, his mistress stole my bracelet, and apparently I'm trending online." Nina pulled back. "Okay, first of all," she said seriously, "the bracelet thing is psychotic." Ida actually smiled. Tiny, but real. They sat together on the couch, while muted news coverage played silently across the television. Footage from the funeral repeated endlessly. Sabrina entering the cathedral. Margaret speaking to reporters. Ida walking into Carter Holdings. Every angle dissected publicly. Nina shook her head. "These people are monsters." Ida stared at the screen quietly. "No," she whispered. "They're just people who spent their whole lives believing money protects them from consequences." The statement surprised even her, because weeks ago Ida would have defended the Carters despite everything. Now she saw them clearly, and clarity changed grief. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Ida almost ignored it before finally answering. "Hello, Mrs. Nichols' professional male voice. This is Agent Thomas Reed with the Federal Financial Crimes Division." Nina's eyes widened instantly. "We'd like to discuss several transactions involving Carter Holdings and the Vail Foundation." Ida sat upright slowly. "Are you investigating the company?" "We're investigating multiple entities." Careful wording. Government wording. "Did Eli know?" Ida asked quietly. A pause. "We're hoping you can help answer that." The call ended 10 minutes later, and somehow the room felt colder afterward. Nina stared at her. "This is getting dangerous." Ida nodded silently, because for the first time she realized this situation was bigger than betrayal. Bigger than marriage. Bigger than revenge. Real crimes existed beneath the Carter empire, and Eli had been buried before anyone uncovered them publicly. Her stomach twisted painfully at the thought. No matter how angry she became, part of her still struggled with the reality that Eli was gone forever. You could hate someone and still mourn them. That was the cruel complexity of love. The next morning, things got worse. Much worse. A video clip surfaced online. Sabrina Vail sitting tearfully during an interview. Perfect lighting, perfect makeup, perfect victim performance. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," Sabrina whispered emotionally. Eli and I loved each other deeply, but his marriage was already broken long before me. Ida turned off the television immediately. Nina cursed loudly from the kitchen. She's unbelievable. But the damage was already spreading. Public sympathy shifted toward Sabrina fast. Because Sabrina understood something dangerous, people forgave mistresses more easily when wives looked powerful. And now Ida looked powerful. That made her easier to villainize. By afternoon, paparazzi waited outside the penthouse. Questions shouted every time she moved near windows. Did Eli leave Sabrina more than you? Are you taking revenge against the Carter family? Did you know about the affair before his death? Every question reduced years of emotional devastation into entertainment. Ida stopped sleeping properly, stopped eating much, stopped recognizing herself in mirrors. The pressure became suffocating. Around sunset, Evelyn Brooks arrived carrying legal files and exhaustion. "You look terrible," Evelyn said honestly. "Thank you. I'm serious." Ida laughed softly despite herself. Evelyn sat beside her. "They're trying to emotionally destabilize you." "Well, it's working." "No," Evelyn corrected calmly. "It's exhausting you." "Different thing." Ida stared down at her untouched tea. "I don't know how to fight people like this." Evelyn's expression softened slightly. "Yes, you do." Ida looked up. "You just haven't realized it yet." Silence lingered. Then Evelyn leaned forward carefully. "People like Margaret and Sabrina survive through image management." Ida listened quietly. "They manipulate emotions publicly because they assume you'll respond emotionally too. And you don't." Ida frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means facts become your weapon." That sentence stayed with Ida long after Evelyn left. Facts become your weapon. Not screaming, not revenge speeches, not emotional breakdowns. Truth. Hours later, Ida sat alone in Eli's office again, staring at the dinner recording saved on her phone. Margaret's voice echoed through the speakers. "You were never truly family." Gavin's threats followed. Sabrina's silence, the humiliation, the manipulation. For years, Ida heard those moments privately and blamed herself. Now she understood something important. Abuse became powerful through secrecy. Slowly, Ida uploaded one short clip online. Nothing dramatic, nothing edited, just Margaret's cold voice saying, "You should leave with dignity." And then, "You were never truly family." That was all. No commentary, no explanation, no revenge caption, just truth. The internet exploded within an hour. People recognized cruelty instantly when it appeared unfiltered. Comments shifted rapidly. "Wait, they treated her like that Margaret Carter is evil. Ida was never the villain." Poor woman lost everything and still stayed composed. Public sympathy began turning. Not completely, but enough. And then something unexpected happened. A former employee from Sabrina's foundation posted anonymously online. "If investigators start checking the Vail Foundation accounts, they'll find much worse than an affair." Ida stared at the message for a long time, because suddenly the scandal wasn't fading. It was growing. Her phone rang again. "Agent Reed, we need to meet tomorrow morning," he said immediately. Ida's pulse quickened. "Why?" A pause. Then, "We found evidence suggesting Eli Carter may not have been acting alone." After the call ended, Ida sat silently in the dark office. Rain tapped softly against the windows again. Chicago glittered below her like a city built entirely from secrets. And for the first time since Eli's death, Ida realized this story might end with handcuffs instead of headlines. Federal agents arrived at Carter Holdings before sunrise. No dramatic sirens, no television helicopters, just dark government SUVs pulling quietly into the underground garage while nervous executives pretended not to panic. But fear moved through the building anyway. Fear always traveled faster than facts. Ida Nichols stood near the executive windows watching rain slide across the glass when Daniel Mercer entered her office. "You should probably prepare yourself," he said carefully. Ida looked up from the financial files spread across her desk. For what Daniel hesitated, They executed search warrants at the Vail Foundation this morning. Ida's stomach tightened immediately. Everything was becoming real now. Not gossip, not scandal. Criminal investigation. Daniel stepped closer quietly. There's more. Of course there was. There are indications Gavin authorized several offshore transfers personally. Ida closed her eyes briefly. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she just felt tired. Because watching an empire collapse was less satisfying than people imagined, especially when pieces of your own life were buried beneath the ruins. An hour later, the first news alerts exploded online. FBI investigates. Carter Holdings Financial Network, Vail Foundation under federal review. Carter family scandal deepens. The stock dropped 11% before lunch. Margaret Carter reportedly locked herself inside the family estate, refusing calls from reporters. And Sabrina Vail. Sabrina disappeared completely. No interviews, no statements, no polished tears for television cameras. Interesting. Predators usually vanished once exposure replaced control. Ida spent most of the morning with attorneys and investigators reviewing records. Every hour uncovered uglier truths. Fake outreach programs, ghost charities, luxury properties hidden beneath non-profit shell companies. And Eli's name appeared repeatedly. Not everywhere, but enough. Enough to break Ida's heart all over again. Because despite everything, part of her still wanted to believe Eli had limits. That somewhere beneath the lies and ambition, the man she married still existed. But every document made that harder. By afternoon, Agent Thomas Reed sat across from her inside a private conference room. Gray suit, careful eyes, professional calm. We believe your husband became aware of the fraud approximately 8 months before his death, he explained. Ida stared down at the paperwork silently. That's around the time he was diagnosed. Yes. The realization hit like ice water. Eli discovered he was dying, while simultaneously discovering the company around him was rotting. And instead of confessing, instead of fixing it, he tried controlling it. Like always. Agent Reed leaned forward slightly. We don't currently believe Eli was the primary architect. Ida looked up slowly. You think it was Gavin partially? And Sabrina? A pause. We believe Ms. Vail acted as intermediary between several entities, meaning she helped move money, hide transactions, protect people. Ida suddenly remembered every glamorous fundraiser Sabrina hosted. All those speeches about empowerment and children's hospitals and social change. Every smile now looked poisonous in hindsight. Agent Reed studied Ida carefully. Can I ask you something personal? She nodded cautiously. Why stay married after discovering the affair? The question caught her off guard. Because nobody ever asked women why betrayal hurt. Only why they tolerated it. Ida looked toward the rain outside the windows. Because leaving someone you built your life around feels like amputating part of yourself. Agent Reed stayed quiet. And because emotionally manipulative people don't destroy you all at once, she continued softly, they do it slowly enough that you keep adapting to survive. The agent nodded once, like he understood more than he expected to. When the meeting finally ended, Ida returned upstairs emotionally drained. The executive floor felt quieter now, emptier. Fear had driven many people home early. Good. Let silence settle over the building for once. Daniel waited outside her office holding a single envelope. There's one more thing. Ida's chest tightened instantly. What is it? It was found in Eli's private storage files this morning. He handed her the envelope carefully. Ida recognized the handwriting immediately. Eli's. The air left her lungs. Daniel spoke gently. You don't have to read it now. But Ida already knew she would. Eventually. Because no matter how much pain Eli caused, part of her still needed answers only he could give. After Daniel left, Ida sat alone for nearly 20 minutes staring at the envelope without opening it. The office around her glowed softly beneath evening light, while Chicago darkened outside. She remembered the first apartment she shared with Eli years ago. Tiny kitchen, broken heater, cheap wine on the floor because they couldn't afford furniture yet. Back then, Eli used to look at her like she mattered more than success. When had that changed? Or worse, had it ever been true? Her phone buzzed suddenly. Nina, you need to see this. What happened? Sabrina. Ida immediately opened the news link Nina sent. A video clip filled the screen. Sabrina Vale leaving a federal building surrounded by cameras. Gone was the elegant confidence. Gone was the polished socialite mask. She looked terrified. Reporters shouted questions aggressively. Did you steal from Carter Holdings? Were you involved with Gavin Carter? Did Eli Carter know Sabrina tried pushing through the crowd before finally snapping? You think I did this alone? The clip cut off instantly afterward. Ida froze. Because panic made people careless. And careless people told truths they once buried carefully. Her phone rang again seconds later. Evelyn Brooks. You saw the video? Yes. She's unraveling. Ida leaned back slowly. And Margaret's still pretending this is salvageable. A bitter laugh escaped Ida before she could stop it. Of course she was. Women like Margaret protected image until the very end. Evelyn's tone softened slightly. How are you holding up? The question surprised Ida. Nobody in power circles asked emotional questions sincerely. I don't know, she admitted. A long silence followed. Then Ida whispered something she hadn't said aloud yet. I miss him sometimes. No judgment came from Evelyn. Only understanding. That doesn't make you weak. Tears suddenly burned behind Ida's eyes. Because grief wasn't logical. You could miss someone who destroyed you. You could mourn the version of them you thought existed. That was the cruelest part. After the call ended, Ida finally opened Eli's letter. The handwriting looked rushed, uneven, human. Ida. If you're reading this, then everything collapsed faster than I hoped. She stopped breathing briefly. The next lines shattered her. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I just became the worst thing that ever happened to you. Tears blurred her vision instantly. God. She hated that those words still affected her. The letter continued. I kept telling myself I could fix everything before you found out. The company, Sabrina, the money, my illness, but I spent so long controlling appearances that I forgot how to tell the truth. Ida covered her mouth, trembling, because finally Eli sounded honest. No manipulation, no charm, just regret. Another paragraph caught her completely off guard. Walter was right about you. You were always stronger than me. Ida cried then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears falling onto paper from a woman grieving both betrayal and love at the same time. Outside the office windows, Chicago glittered cold and endless beneath the night sky. And for the first time since Eli died, Ida realized something devastating. The man she loved had existed once. He just disappeared long before the funeral. Ida Nichols read Eli's letter 3 times before sunrise. Not because she misunderstood it, because part of her couldn't accept that honesty had finally arrived too late to matter. The city outside the penthouse windows slowly brightened into pale gray morning while she sat barefoot on the office floor, surrounded by legal files, financial records, and the wreckage of a life she once thought was secure. Eli's handwriting blurred every time tears gathered again. Not dramatic tears, not cinematic sobbing, just grief leaking quietly from places she thought had already gone numb. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. The sentence hurt most because she believed he meant it. That was the tragedy. Eli loved her. In his own broken, selfish, emotionally stunted way, he loved her. And still he destroyed her. That realization changed something fundamental inside Ida. Because women were taught to excuse cruelty if love existed somewhere underneath it. But love without respect became poison eventually. And poison still killed you slowly, even when served tenderly. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Daniel Mercer stood outside the office doorway holding coffee. You've been here all night. Ida wiped quickly beneath her eyes before answering. So have you. A faint smile touched his face. Fair point. He stepped inside, carefully placing coffee beside her without asking questions she clearly couldn't answer yet. Daniel noticed the letter immediately. You read it. Ida nodded. He apologized. Daniel stayed quiet, not interrupting, not trying to fix her emotions. Strangely enough, that kindness almost made her cry again. I spent weeks hating him, she whispered. Daniel leaned against the desk quietly, and now Ida looked down at the pages in her hands. Now I think he hated himself first. Silence settled heavily between them. Then Daniel said something unexpected. My father cheated on my mother for 11 years. Ida looked up. Daniel rarely spoke personally. She stayed because she believed loving someone enough would eventually make them honest. His expression darkened slightly. It didn't. The simplicity of that truth hurt, because Ida understood it completely now. Women kept trying to heal people who benefited from staying broken. Daniel checked his watch reluctantly. The restructuring meeting starts in an hour. Reality returned immediately. The company, the investigations, the collapsing Carter empire. Ida folded Eli's letter carefully. Then she stood. I'm selling the mansion. Daniel blinked slightly. That was fast. No, Ida said quietly. It's actually years overdue. The Carter estate felt colder than ever when Ida returned later that afternoon. Empty hallways echoed with the ghosts of performances she no longer wanted to participate in. Perfect dinners, forced smiles, pretending not to notice betrayal sitting across the table. The house suddenly looked less like luxury and more like emotional theater. Margaret waited in the formal sitting room wearing pale gray silk and exhaustion. For the first time since Ida met her, Margaret looked old. Not elegant, not intimidating, just tired. Federal agents searched Gavin's condo this morning, Margaret said quietly before Ida could speak. No greeting, no warmth, just damage control until the bitter end. Ida remained standing. I heard. Margaret stared into her untouched tea. They froze several family accounts. Still talking about money. Interesting. After everything, Margaret still measured catastrophe financially instead of emotionally. You blame me for this, Ida said softly. Margaret finally looked up. You exposed us publicly. No, Ida corrected calmly. The truth exposed you publicly. Margaret's jaw tightened faintly. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then unexpectedly, Margaret whispered, I did love Eli. The vulnerability in her voice startled Ida. Because monsters rarely viewed themselves as monsters. They viewed themselves as survivors. Margaret stood slowly and walked toward the fireplace. When Walter built this family, he taught our children that weakness was dangerous. Her eyes remained distant. Eli learned early that affection meant vulnerability. Ida's chest tightened painfully, because suddenly pieces connected in terrible ways. Eli wasn't born emotionally manipulative. He was shaped that way, conditioned, rewarded for control, punished for softness. Margaret turned toward Ida carefully. He loved you more than anyone. The sentence nearly shattered her again. Then why did he treat me like I was disposable? Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it, because there was no answer good enough. Finally she whispered, because he became his father's son in all the wrong ways. Silence settled between them. Not peaceful, just exhausted. Ida realized something important, then understanding someone's damage did not excuse the damage they caused. That distinction mattered. Deeply. Margaret walked toward a side table and picked up a small velvet box. She handed it toward Ida silently. Inside sat the wedding ring Eli placed on Ida's finger 14 years earlier. Margaret's voice trembled slightly. He asked me to give this back to you before hospice care started. Ida stared at the ring in shock. What? Margaret nodded weakly. He said if you stayed with him after learning the truth, then you deserved the choice to leave freely too. Tears burned instantly behind Ida's eyes. because even at the end, Eli understood exactly what he had done to her. He just understood too late. Ida closed the box gently. "I don't want it." Margaret looked startled. "It's your wedding ring," Noida said softly. "It's a memory of a woman who thought love required self-sacrifice." She placed the box back onto the table carefully. Margaret stared at her in silence, and for the first time ever, Ida no longer felt smaller than her, not emotionally, not socially, not spiritually. Freedom arrived quietly sometimes, not with revenge, with detachment. As Ida turned toward the doorway, Margaret spoke again. "What happens to this family now?" The question sounded almost frightened. Ida paused briefly, then answered honestly. "I think your family finally becomes accountable." Outside the mansion, cold winds swept across the massive estate grounds while workers removed press barriers near the gates. The empire still stood physically, but emotionally, morally, it had already collapsed. Ida walked upstairs one final time toward the master bedroom she once shared with Eli. The room looked untouched. His watches still sat neatly arranged beside the dresser. His jacket still hung in the closet. Fragments of a man frozen in time. She opened the balcony doors slowly. Cold evening air rushed inside. Chicago glittered faintly in the distance. Ida remembered standing on this same balcony years earlier, while Eli wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. "We're building a beautiful life," he whispered back then. Maybe he believed it. Maybe she did too. But beautiful things built on dishonesty eventually cracked beneath their own weight. Ida took one final look around the bedroom. Then she picked up the last folder waiting on the dresser. Corporate restructuring documents. Her signature line highlighted at the bottom. One signature would officially separate Carter Holdings from the remaining family trust structure permanently. No more Carter control. No more Carter protection. No more Carter prison. Ida signed calmly, and in that moment, she stopped being Eli Carter's widow. She became herself again. 6 months later. Chicago felt different. Or maybe Ida Nichols did. Morning sunlight poured through the massive windows of her new apartment overlooking the river, while jazz music played softly from a speaker near the kitchen. No marble hallways. No Carter portraits. No silence heavy with emotional tension. Just peace. Real peace. The kind she used to think only existed in movies. Ida stood barefoot near the coffee machine, wearing an oversized cream sweater and linen pants, while the city slowly woke beneath her. For the first time in years, she no longer felt anxious inside her own home. That realization still stunned her sometimes. Healing wasn't dramatic the way revenge stories made people believe. It happened quietly, in nervous systems finally learning safety again. On the dining table nearby sat drafts for the Nichols Foundation, the organization Ida created 3 months after resigning permanently from Carter family control. Its mission was simple: helping women recover from financial and emotional abuse after toxic relationships. The foundation already funded legal support programs, emergency housing partnerships, and financial literacy initiatives across Illinois. Turns out surviving humiliation made you very good at recognizing hidden pain in other women. Ida never planned that future. But maybe the best parts of life began after the versions you planned collapsed. Her phone buzzed softly across the counter. Daniel Mercer. A small smile touched her lips before she answered. "Good morning. You sound happy," Daniel said. Careful, Ida teased lightly. That almost sounded like concern. Daniel laughed quietly. God. She had forgotten laughter could feel safe. Not performative. Not strategic. Safe. "You still coming to the board luncheon?" he asked. Ida walked slowly toward the windows overlooking the river. "Unfortunately, yes. You say that every time. Because corporate lunches still feel like punishment." Another laugh. Then softer. "You've changed, Ida." She leaned lightly against the glass. "I hope so." A pause lingered between them. Warm, comfortable, not rushed. That was what surprised Ida most about Daniel. He never pushed, never manipulated silence, never demanded emotional labor from her. After everything with Eli, kindness without pressure felt almost shocking. "Pick you up at noon," he asked. "Okay." After the call ended, Ida stood quietly for a moment watching boats move slowly across the water below. There was a time she thought surviving betrayal meant becoming colder, harder, untouchable. Instead, healing taught her something different. Boundaries and bitterness were not the same thing. You could protect your peace without destroying your softness. That mattered. Deeply. Carter Holdings survived. Barely. Gavin Carter accepted a plea agreement connected to financial fraud investigations and disappeared from public life almost overnight. Margaret Carter sold the Connecticut estate 2 months later. And Sabrina vanished from Chicago society completely after federal findings linked her foundation to multiple illegal transactions. The media moved on eventually. It always did. Scandal was temporary. Healing took longer. Ida learned that the hard way. Some nights she still woke suddenly remembering Eli's voice. Sometimes she still missed him. Not the man he became, the man he used to be. And grieving potential was its own kind of heartbreak. At noon, Daniel arrived exactly on time. As always, Ida opened the apartment door, smiling faintly. Daniel paused when he saw her. "What, you look peaceful." The honesty in his voice warmed something inside her. Careful, she teased softly. "You're getting emotionally observant. I work in finance. This is growth for me." She laughed again. Easy, natural. Nothing like the exhausting emotional calculations she once performed constantly around Eli. Daniel glanced toward the foundation paperwork on her dining table. "You've been busy." "I've been rebuilding." His eyes met hers carefully. "That suits you better." For a moment, silence settled between them. But unlike the silence inside her marriage, this one didn't feel dangerous. It felt safe enough to breathe inside. Daniel finally offered his arm jokingly. Ready to terrify executives with integrity, Ida smiled. "Absolutely." That evening after the luncheon ended, Ida drove somewhere alone. The cemetery sat quiet beneath fading autumn light, while cold wind moved softly through rows of stone markers. She hadn't visited Eli's grave in months, not because she hated him, because she needed distance before she could return honestly. Ida walked slowly across the grass carrying no flowers, just herself. The headstone looked smaller than she remembered. Elijah Carter, beloved son, visionary leader. Interesting. Nothing about husband, nothing about truth. Ida stood silently for a long time, then finally whispered, "You really could have been better than this." Tears burned briefly behind her eyes. Not painful tears anymore, just human ones. "I loved you," she admitted softly. The wind moved gently through the trees. "And I think part of you loved me too." That was the tragedy. Not that Eli felt nothing, that he valued power more than the people who loved him honestly. Ida looked up toward the fading sunset above the cemetery. For years she believed surviving meant enduring, staying, sacrificing, forgiving endlessly. Now she understood something different. Real love should never require abandoning yourself. And loyalty without respect became self-destruction eventually. She exhaled slowly, then smiled faintly through tears. "You losing me was the consequence," she whispered. "Not my punishment." For the first time since his death, she felt free saying it. No anger remained, no obsession, no desperate need for closure. Just acceptance. And acceptance felt lighter than revenge ever could. Ida stepped back from the grave quietly, then turned toward the cemetery exit where Chicago's skyline glowed gold beneath the setting sun. Her phone buzzed softly. "Daniel." She smiled before answering. "Hey, you okay?" Ida looked back one final time toward Eli's grave, then forward again, toward the city, toward her life, toward herself. And finally, honestly, she answered, "Yeah." A small breath. I think I finally am. As she walked away beneath the fading light, Ida realized something profound. Some women do not become powerful because they are loved correctly. Some women become powerful because they survive being loved wrongly and choose themselves anyway. Some of the deepest heartbreaks in life do not come from strangers. They come from the people we loved enough to sacrifice ourselves for. Ida's story reminds us that kindness is beautiful, but kindness without boundaries can slowly become self-destruction. Loving someone should never require shrinking yourself, abandoning your instincts, or accepting disrespect just to keep the relationship alive. For years, Ida believed endurance was the same thing as loyalty. She believed if she stayed patient enough, forgiving enough, supportive enough, eventually she would be valued the way she deserved. But the painful truth is this: some people will continue taking from you for as long as you continue giving without limits. And often the people who benefit most from your silence are the same people who call you too emotional the moment you finally speak the truth. But this story is not really about revenge. It's about awakening. It's about the moment a woman finally realizes that her worth was never dependent on being chosen, approved of, or loved correctly by someone else. Real healing begins when you stop asking, "Why wasn't I enough for them?" and start asking, "Why did I believe I had to suffer to deserve love?" Ida did not become powerful because her life was easy. She became powerful because betrayal forced her to see herself clearly for the first time. And sometimes that is how transformation begins, not through comfort, but through heartbreak that finally opens your eyes. If this story touched you in any way, take a moment to reflect on your own life. Have you ever stayed too long in a place where you were tolerated instead of cherished? Have you ever mistaken survival for love? And what do you think was the most powerful moment in Ida's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if you enjoy emotional stories about healing, betrayal, self-worth, and powerful new beginnings, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story. Sometimes the ending of one painful chapter becomes the beginning of the life you were always meant to live.